of over 300. Sorry. This is a highly invasive pest of over 300 different species, so it really doesn't discriminate on kind of what it eats. And subsequently, since you live in Clark County or near it and around it, there's actually an outbreak kind of across the border in Oregon. So the thing that we can do to work together is if we're kind of aware of this beetle, what it looks like, what we should do with it, then we can kind of safeguard our state here in Washington by keeping an eye out, looking for it, and then responding if it's ever detected. So kind of the first thing that I really want to talk about is I'm just going to kind of tell you the history of the beetle and how it's gotten here and a little bit of history in Washington. And then we'll kind of really dive deep into what is the beetle, what are its problems. At the end, we'll kind of look like some other beetles or insects you might see that might resemble the beetle, and then kind of wrap it up with what we can do. So it's a scarab beetle native to Japan, hence its names. A lot of insects are named after their country of origin. That's how entomologists have just named them for many, many years. By being like, this is gonna be beetle that consumes like green leafy material, okay? It's not a beetle that's you're gonna find like boring in a pine tree. So I have a map here for you, and you see it's obviously the United States, and you see lots of green and purple. Let me see if I can get this off my screen. Okay, can I get this? I don't know if you can see these boxes I'm seeing, but I'll just move them out of the way. Okay, so you can see on the purple, on the eastern United States, that's where the beetle's been determined to be found by census or survey. So somewhere the state has looked for it and they have found it repeatedly over multiple years. And then as you move across the United States, you see areas of green. That's where the states have actively looked for the beetle and hasn't been found. And then yellow is where areas where it's been found, light brown and brown, meaning it's been found and eradicated. Okay, so what does this survey or this thing I'm referring to look like in Washington? So if you don't know, and if you're not aware, we actually have a very extensive trapping program, and we trap for lots of different insects and lots of different things that we want to keep out of Washington state. And one of them is this beetle. Okay, so WSDA started trapping for the Japanese beetle in the early 90s to basically accompany the passage of a state quarantine, meaning if we find the beetle, we are going to solidify it and get rid of it. Okay, by doing this, by putting these traps up, if the beetle is present and around, we're going to detect it early so that we can eliminate the problem, before it arises, before it establishes. So looking at this map here, the purple and green things, those are just areas where grapes are grown, where vineyards are. What you want to look at are the orange dots. The orange dots are going to be everywhere where we've placed a beetle trap. Okay, so you can see that we trap heavily where there's people. Another thing that you may not notice off this map is that we trap heavily where there's airports. Okay, it's one of the favorite ways these beetles like to travel. And then you see down kind of where you're at towards that Clark County, there's lots of orange dots too. That's to make sure we're protecting that area from the Oregon border. And then we kind of trap and scatter for them throughout the rest of the United States, or the rest of the state of Washington. You see a couple red dots on there. That's where a beetle was caught in a trap, confirmed and caught. Okay. So this is kind of what, if you're ever out driving around, you might be seeing these traps. The traps we use are kind of the ones you see in the middle. They're green ones that have a pheromone or a scent lure. If you look at the picture on the far right, there's a white circular thing. And it's kind of designed with the idea of if the beetle's attracted to it. It's very highly selective, and sometimes they actually kind of just smell like roses. If the beetle's present, it's attracted to that trap. Then it falls in this little bucket here, and then it can't get out. Okay, people can buy their own beetle traps, right? So the one here on the very far left, it's a bag trap, right? It's one that's meant to be used for one season. You catch a bunch of beetles in it, and then you throw it away. So in Washington, right? I showed you the map here where we have all of the different beetle traps, okay? And this is kind of the history of the beetle in Washington. It's going to be the same from the colors on the first map. We survey all around the state, right? If it's green, it's good. It hasn't been found there. If it's yellow, it's been found. If it's light brown to dark brown, right, it's going to be found and then eradicated. And what I mean by eradication is I mean complete removal, okay? And it hasn't been detected in years after that, okay? So you can see that it's been in Clark, King, Pierce, Snohomish, Spokane, and Yakima County in the past. And most of the times, right, think about King County, what's there? The airport, okay? So this is actually how the beetles will typically travel. It carries itself very well through airplanes, and that's typically what happens and where they're found. We would call it a one and done. So we trap heavy at the airports. We might catch one beetle, okay? And then that beetle is removed. Then the airport actually goes through and they treat for the beetle, so it's not able to make any populations moving forth. That's kind of typical what we would expect to find with this beetle if it is found, that one and done, okay? However, it doesn't always live its life as this adult shape that we see, right? It'll also come in a grub and larvae form before it reaches that adult. And while it's in that form, right, it's living below the surface. It's living, it's living in dirt. So if that dirt is moved, that's containing this larva, right? If you're moving dirt with this larva in it or a grub, then you're moving it, and then it'll eventually hatch into the adult beetle, and then you'll have beetles again, okay? So people might have potted plants that they unknowingly have the grubs in them, and then they move those potted plants, and then the beetle is transported as well. Adult beetles too, remember they like to eat green leafy things, so the adult beetles themselves can be like easily transported by like grass clippings and other yard debris. So it's very good and capable of hitchhiking. It's hitchhiked itself about halfway across the United States since it's became established, and it will continue to hitchhike unless we work together to find ways to stop it. So that's kind of it on like the history of what Washington's been doing. I'll briefly mention kind of at the end what's going on in our state, but now we're just gonna really dive deep into what is the beetle, what does it look like, and kind of how its life cycle to help you understand why we do what we do at certain times of year, and also help you understand when you might see it and why it causes such the problems it does. But before I kind of move on, I don't know if there's any questions. Erica, if there's anything in the chat box that you want me to address.
Not so far. I'm just curious though, could you tell us a little bit about the one that was found in Clark County? Do you have any details on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that briefly here at the end, okay?
Great, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so with this beetle, right, we need to know it in two forms. It's grubber, it's larva form, right? And that's what it's gonna be before it hatches into that adult beetle. So it's characterized as a white C-shaped grub, okay? Lots and lots of grubs are white and C-shaped. It has, as you can see in the picture, it has a brown tan head. You'll be able to see the legs on it. It's typically of an eighth of an inch to an inch long. You're gonna find these pretty much typically in the spring, but remember, you're not gonna find it on a plant because it's living in the soil, right? The hardest thing about this beetle is, or this grub, is that you really have to get it underneath a microscope to distinguish it from other grubs. So if you're ever out and about or you ever get anything into your clinics or anything, it will, to be able to say, yes, this is a Japanese beetle, it has to be able to get looked at underneath the microscope. So a lot of the times we can identify different bugs and stuff through pictures, but unfortunately with the grub, the actual thing is needed. So that grub, right, it's gonna live below the surface, and I'm gonna run through this life stage just really briefly to help you understand. So in the winter, the grub is actually, it digs itself down deeper into the soil, right, to keep it safe from those harsh winters and stuff. And then as spring comes, that grub is gonna move up further towards the surface, okay? And then as summer gets here, and as the temperatures get warmer, the grub will turn into the pupae, which will then hatch into the beetle. Now, as you can see, when the adult beetle comes up, you see the plant up there. It's obviously eating the plants. It's mating, and then while it's doing that, it's actually going back below the surface, laying eggs. And then those eggs will hatch into the grubs, right, which will grub it until the winter comes, and then they'll dig themselves down deep again. Now, I'm going to talk about how their life cycle, how they destruct things during it, but I'm going to first talk about what the adult beetle looks like. So they're typically around 1/3 to 1/2 of an inch long. Okay. So compare if, oh, I don't have the penny picture for you. Anyway, they're a smaller beetle. Okay. They're going to have a very metallic-y green head and thorax with copper wing covers, right? A lot of people say they're very pretty, right? Because they're bright and they're shiny and they'll catch your eye. Some things to notice about the beetle that you may not see if it's just outside because it's a smaller detail is that it has these little 5 white patches, right, of hair on its side, and then it has the 2 white patches on the tip. Now, remember, the adults we're pretty much only going to see in the summer, kind of from like June to maybe late October, right, because they're not hatched into the adults yet. So we're going to see the adults in the summer and the grubs in the spring. Okay. So this is kind of a better picture that I kind of want to talk to you about the life cycle and how it becomes so destructive. All right, so remember the grubs are below the surface and the grubs are really, really hungry. So when they wake up from that winter, they want to eat. And actually what they eat are obviously going to be roots because it's below the surface. Now, their favorite thing and the thing they typically eat is going to be grass roots. But they have been known to feed on like some ornamental plants and other vegetables. And they're actually very mobile. They're capable of moving themselves around in the soil to find the proper soil moisture, the right temperature, and obviously somewhere where there's lots and lots of roots. And they'll actually feed on these roots until obviously the grass dies. It's not allowed to take up any water and it's just brown and dead. Sometimes if the feeding is really bad, there will even be bare patches. And I have a picture to show you what that looks like. So the grubs are going to eat and eat and eat until the spring. And then they're going to turn into that pupae, which will then hatch into that adult beetle. And remember, like I said, as the beetles are out, they're skeletonizing leaves, they're skeletonizing buds of flowers, and they're really chewing through that material. Now, the problem with this is while they're doing that is they're mating and laying eggs, and they're capable of laying 30, I believe it's 30 to 40 eggs each cycle. So they're really fast at reproducing while they're going back and laying those eggs, coming up, feeding, and continually repeating that. So after we leave the summer, right, those adult beetles, then they will die. Their carcasses will blow off into the wind, other animals will eat them, etc. But we have to worry below the soil again, because those eggs have hatched into the grubs. And guess what? Remember, grubs are hungry. So they're actually going to eat into the fall until they go dormant for the winter. And then that cycle will really repeat itself. So kind of 1 or 2 more slides. And then if there's any questions, Erica, that might be a good stopping point too. So remember, those grubs are eating the roots of the grass. So I have a picture for you here on the left, and I have another picture later on from an area where Japanese beetle are detected, but you can see here how it has those brown patches in the lawn. And actually what happens is if you were to like take a knife and cut a line, you'd be able to peel that grass, peel it back like you were peeling up carpet from a floor because it's just so dead. A lot of the times in areas where Japanese beetle has been detected and confirmed before, residents will be out like, you'll just be watering your lawns, right? In anticipation, okay, hey, spring's here, let's water our lawn, let's make it green. And that grass just never turns green because it doesn't have the roots to take up the water because the beetle grubs have ate it. And I have a picture over for you here on the right. That is taken from last summer from the town of Grandview, which is over in eastern Washington. And you can see here how the beetles cause the damage by skeletonizing those leaves. Now, I know that you know of like other like leaf cutter insects and things like that, but this is the typical damage that the beetles will cause when they're feasting on leaves. And then here's some more damage you'll see by the beetles feasting on roses. So the picture on the left here is actually taken by a resident, again, over in eastern Washington, who had to pick all of these beetles off of her roses daily, okay? So you can see here that they'll actually eat the buds of the flowers. And then I just really want to remind people that sometimes you might not see beetles, but you'll see the evidence of their destruction. And sometimes if you look on the ground, you'll find them too, because they've fallen off. So it's also a really good reminder that it might be something as simple as like mowing your lawn. But those beetles are in those grass clippings. So you send that off to the yard waste processor, and then, then the beetles are going to start growing there too. So before I move forward, I'm going to talk about some kind of common host plants for the beetle, but are there any questions, Erica?
No, not so far.
Okay, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them to Erica. We'll definitely have time for discussion at the end, but sometimes it's nice to not just listen to my voice. So the state to the south of us, Oregon, right, has been dealing with the Japanese beetle infestation and eradication now for over multiple years. They had kind of a large outbreak in 2016 and have been continually working each year to treat for it. So they actually went ahead and compiled a list of common host plants that I have for you here on the right that really kind of affect us in our growing climate. So you can see that there's also things that you're going to grow in your backyard, like tomatoes, blueberries, blackberries, and then a lot of agriculture could really be affected in consuming those. There's hops and grapes and all of the roots of those various grasses. So the picture on the top left here, you can see again how the beetles caused the damage. That picture is also taken from Grandview, and the picture on the bottom left, you can see the damage that they caused to the raspberries. So we all know that plants can tolerate like limited feeding, right? But after years and years and years of feeding, not after years, but after all these beetles, and when you have a heavy infestation and they're feeding, it's going to reduce those growths and those yields. People are going to have to start treating for them. There's also a couple other things that follow the beetles as far as rules and regulations, and we just don't really want our trades to be impacted by not being able to export things if the beetle were to survive. Okay, so I'm going to quickly kind of run through some other beetles that are kind of seen around the area that are not Japanese beetles. So the one on the far left, it's metallic-y and beautiful, just like the Japanese beetles usually seem to be very metallic-y, but obviously it's blue. It's going to be oval shaped, and it's typically under 1/2 inch long. Hence its name is blue milkweed beetle, because it likes that milkweed. One over I have for you on the right is a flower shaper. I kind of think it typically looks like different kind of brick colored, right? It's light brown, and it's typically around 1/2 inch long. You'll find them in and around lots of flowers. Next slide, maybe. Okay. I'm sorry, this picture is a little blurry. It's a green pine shaper. This beetle is going to tend to be more like elongated in its body, and it might not even kind of appear flat. This color doesn't look very bright and vibrant, but I have seen it be very metallic-y green to almost like an iridescent brown in color. So it can kind of range that way. And it's around about 1/3 inch long. The one on the far right is probably the one that's easily misidentified to be Japanese beetle, but it's going to be over on the opposite side of Washington, but it is called a little bear beetle. Okay. And it's actually called a bear beetle because if you look at the back of it, it looks fuzzy and hairy, and it's brown, kind of like a bear. Okay. So they are covered in that woolly fuzz. They kind of have the right colorings as Japanese beetles, but a lot of white woolly fuzz, about the same of 1/3 to 3/4 inch long. Okay. One more set of beetles, and then I know that there's a couple questions. So this is called a blister beetle. Okay. They're green, blue, blackish in color, about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch long. The Klamath weed beetle is actually introduced to help control Klamath weed. It's oblong in shape. It's metallic-y blue, bronze green, or purple in color, and they're about 1/4 inch long. Now, there's a question asking if are these other beetles also destructive to vegetables and ornamentals? So some of the beetles, right, they are going to obviously feast on things, but they're not considered kind of like a federally quarantined or federally regulated pest. So I would never say that an insect is not destructive, but some of these are native. Some of these were introduced to control various different things. If you're ever not sure, if you ever see a pest and you're just wondering, is it going to be good or bad? You just snap a picture and then there's this email at the bottom. You can send it in to us. We'll tell you what it is and answer questions, any questions that you may have. So kind of the last thing that I want to talk about is kind of like, what can we do to kind of work together? What can you do living where you're at? And then just kind of tell you about, you know, what the history is in your area. So if you think you see a Japanese beetle, what I really want you to do is, we carry these things around with us, these cell phones, and they're really great at taking pictures, if you didn't know. Beetles, yes, I know they can fly away. They're really small, sometimes hard to see, but if you can take a photo of it and then submit that photo to us, then we can positively or negatively say, yes, this is a beetle. No, this isn't. If you suspect you see one and you're not able to get a photo, go ahead and report it as well, because then we kind of have an idea of where to potentially look for. You can report potential beetle sightings 3 different ways. We do have a website devoted solely to Japanese beetle. It's agr.wa.gov/beetles. You can also send that photo or send it in an email to pestprogram@agr.wa.gov. Now we do monitor it Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So that's probably going to be your fastest response if you want to talk to someone and know faster. That's probably the easiest way to go. The other thing, we do have a hotline. You feel free to call that hotline. And if we don't answer it live, we definitely always call you back. So our job together is, if we think we see something, we take a picture and report it. Okay, it's part of early detection and rapid response. If we all work together, there's lots more eyes out rather than just me having my eyes out. Yes, we trap for them, but sometimes people are the best form of contact for detecting something early. And in this beetle's case, right, it also shown to be true. So we had deployed traps in 2020 looking for Japanese beetle, and we caught a single beetle in Sunnyside, or we caught 2 beetles in Sunnyside and 1 beetle in Grandview. And now this area isn't by an airport, so we said, oh, we have a really big problem coming on our hands with just 3 beetles. We knew that we had a problem. So as part of kind of figuring out how big this problem is and where is it at, right? What we're going to do is, we're going to first work with the public and say, hey, if you live in this area, have you seen them? So you can see the post over here on the right during National Invasive Species Week, I put it out there on social media and asked Washington residents, if you've seen this beetle, please report it. And I got the picture. We got the picture back on the right. Okay. This is from a resident in Grandview, right? That picture you saw in the roses earlier, she said that she was picking up to 75 beetles off her plants per day. So this kind of, confirmed for us that we definitely do have a problem like we thought. And now we know that the extent is much larger, and we kind of want to get running and rolling as fast as we can. I'll have the email on the last screen. It's pestprogram@agr.wa.gov. I believe one's capitalized and one's not. It doesn't matter. So in your area, right, there is a beetle infestation south of the border in Oregon, okay? And they've been working on eradicating this beetle for multiple years now, like I mentioned. So I have a map here for you. You can see that here's Vancouver, okay? And you go across the border, right? And you can cross Portland, and you can see here where the infestation is in Oregon, okay? And you can see that they've also caught beetles over by the airport as well. So what Oregon's doing is they're going in and they're actually treating residential areas. They're really trying to make it known for people to, not move things in and out of the area. And they're doing the best they can to remove the beetle. Now flip forward to the picture on the right. That's where we caught a Japanese beetle in the past in Clark County. Now this was also considered a one and done because we caught the beetle. The area was treated, and then we've been continually surveying to make sure that no other beetles arrive. Like, we aren't finding any other beetles. But for me, the border of Washington is very, very close to the infestation in Oregon, right? And people travel back and forth, right? They can hitchhike on cars, They can hitchhike in camping gear, and they would be able to take them across the border. If they can lay some eggs, then you have a population beginning to establish, okay? As well as, you know, if someone goes over and buys a potted plant and moves it. Maybe going to the next slide, maybe. Okay, so this is the last slide that I have for you. And then we can go into answering and asking questions or whatever there may be. So the first link for you, this is how you can kind of stay connected and hear about and learn what's going on. And we do have a Facebook group that we run and monitor. So if you're into social media and you want to connect with others and keep up to date on the beetle world, that's a good thing to join. But probably my favorite thing is to signing up for email alerts. So I put together kind of monthly or bi-monthly beetle blasts. Okay, and it's just a PDF that actually gets sent to your email telling you what we found, what we're doing, any updates to the beetle program. Now, a lot of this right now is going to be kind of centered around targeting the area of Grandview, which is over by like Yakima and Benton County, which is over in Eastern Washington, because we're actually running a multi-year eradication currently over there right now. But updates and things go on in there. Remember, the best thing to do, everything that we can do right now to work together is if we see it, we report it, okay? Like I said, you're gonna be my early detectors. You guys are out there working, and then, you know, we can all work together to protect our backyard gardens, protect our lawns, and protect all the agriculture in Washington. So now is a good time for us to go into some questions, right? There is a question in the chat box. It says the area is treated. How are the beetle sites treated? Does the treatment harm pollinators? So when we go in and we treat an area for Japanese beetle, or for say that the airport does, typically what they're doing is they're applying an insecticide, but this is going to be a targeted insecticide to target these beetles. The other thing that they're doing is during this application, when they're doing it, they're typically applying a celloprene, and it's typically in a granular formula. So what happens is it gets applied to the surface, and then it gets watered in, right? So it's only targeting those, what it's doing is it's targeting those grubs below the surface, that if they are there, they then take up this insecticide and then they die. So it's not going to be like an aerial application. The question of it, does the treatment harm pollinators? The wording is the EPA did a study of the effects, and they determined it to not harm current populations of pollinators. So a lot of the airports are going to be kind of international airports. If you think about it, you know, you think about it in like King County, where mail and stuff is coming in and out, and exports and imports are coming in and out, kind of that type of thing, where it's coming from an area where there already is beetles. So that's also going to kind of be the same for things coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, or if people are buying like potted plants online and then having them shipped here, that's also a way that the beetle could travel. And I do have some more pictures if I can figure out how to do this. So I wanted to show you a couple pictures of, oh, it made it really big, of the beetle infestation in Grandview and what it looks like when you start finding a lot of beetles. So what happened is we're trapping for this beetle infestation in an area where we saw beetles prior, okay? And the largest outbreak kind of in the north-south and the western United States has kind of been an outbreak in Idaho, and it was about 3,500 beetles being found, and we caught 24,000 beetles. So here's basically what we did here was we took our hand and just wiped it out of a tree. And these are the beetles that ended up in the bag. You can see here all these beetles congregating in the lawns. You can see this is just emptying out one trap and how many beetles are caught in it. Couple beetles going into traps. I want to just show you some of the rose damage and stuff damage from the beetles. So you can see all the beetles being caught here. Maybe they're all just eating grass in these pictures. Okay, so here you can see that like the beetles are actually eating the buds of the flowers too, right? So if they're not killing the leaves so the flower can't grow and protect, they're eating the buds of the flowers too. So your beautiful roses are very ugly. There's a question asking in the chat box if these beetles fly. They are capable of flying. Kind of the flight distance of them is unknown. It has been wrote in different literature before that people have been fishing 5 miles off the coast and have had a swarm of beetles. So it's known that they're capable of, traveling a distance if they needed to. But what's going to happen is they're going to be carried by the wind, right? Because they're really small, they're really light. So if they kind of fly up and then get caught in the wind, right, the wind is going to take them. And you can see some of the damage that's being caused from the beetles here. They really don't discriminate on what they eat, right? They skeletonize the leaves. And if we don't have any leaves on our plant will die. So just some of the damage, and these are photos that were taken last summer in Washington. So you can see the damage that they'll cause. So if everyone remembers, when we see these beetles, what are we supposed to do? You can see them on some corn here. Okay, well, that's it for the beetles. He was testing the mate on them, but they do cause quite a bit of damage and they multiply very fast. So if you're interested in seeing more of these photos, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat box, but that is kind of all of my presentation I have for you. I don't know if there's any more questions. We do have, about 20 minutes left.
So if folks have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat box. I'll just remind you that this talk has been recorded, and if you want to go back and look at some of those pictures and keep an eye out, that's always a great idea. So Cassie, someone's asking about or mentioning that they know people on the East Coast that have these beetles. So they're mentioning a domestic flight. Yep. So anytime anything's moved from an area where the beetles are to over here, that's definitely possible too. People on the East Coast will literally go outside at night and they can set like a bucket of soapy water, and in the morning you'll wake up with beetles in your bucket of soapy water. Do Japanese beetles have any natural predators? There are like different things that eat the beetles and might munch on them, but as far as like if we were able to kind of introduce something to take care of this beetle problem, it's not going to work in terms of eradication, because eradication is complete removal, and typically a biological control is not going to completely remove and eradicate. So there might be things that can be introduced to help kind of eat them and keep them down, but in terms of like removing it, that's never going to actually solve the complete problem. Yeah, there's a comment in the chat box about people seeing Japanese beetles and remember them eating all the roses and significant damage in Illinois in the 1990s. There's a question in the chat box kind of relating to that. Is there any progress being made to reduce their population in the US? See if I can pull this map up to you. So, see if I can pull up a picture map for you to look at while I talk. It's going to be on this one. Japanese beetle is a federally quarantined pest. Cassie, just a quick note, you're not sharing anymore, so.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to open because I'm not connected. I don't know if I'm connected to the drive where it's saved at anymore.
Okay.
Because it slows me down, my connection down. So there's a thing called a federal quarantine that kind of protects states with Japanese beetle. In the United States, we agreed to what is called a domestic harmonization plan here. And what that does is it protects states that don't have Japanese beetle populations, but also kind of gives places a means of, current slide, but gives states that do have Japanese beetle the ability to still perhaps trade goods and move things in and out. So you can see that like the states in the red, right? We don't have the beetles, right? So we can ship things in and out as much as we want. The states in the green, however, right? They shouldn't be, because they are infested with Japanese beetles. So before they can ship something out, typically it has to be, if it's like nursery stock or something, it's going to have to be treated, right? It's going to have to be shipped free of dirt and various things like that. So there are a few things that kind of go on and happen to keep the beetles from spreading through means of like imports and exports, especially regulating nursery stock and like plants and stuff. But it doesn't stop anyone, from driving their car. It doesn't stop people from moving and bringing their potted plants with them. Then there's just so many things. All invasive species are just such good hitchhikers that they just get on something and they go, and then you have a population somewhere else. I don't know if I can see the chat box anymore. Yeah, I can. So that's kind of like what happens to kind of keep the population reduced, especially over here in the Western United States. If we find it, we're going to work to just eradicate it. The Eastern United States, I think they're just living with it, dealing with it. We really don't want it in Washington. There's going to be the potentially, other countries that might not even want our exports if it were to become established, as well as other states. There's a question about what other outreach activities are we doing in Washington. I'm not sure if that question is referring to this project or me. Do you want to know what other Japanese beetle outreach we're doing, or what other things I talk about? Okay. So the Japanese beetle census outbreak is like primarily in Grandview, Washington. There's been a ton of outreach that I've been doing out there, like personally on the ground, holding open houses. People are going out, we're handing out flyers and asking people to report. Well, doing lots of virtual stuff like this as well. But we're actually in the process of physically treating people's properties currently. So we've managed to get a contractor to apply an insecticide to treat for the beetles in that area. Some of the other things that, as part of the pest program, that I kind of talk about, that we kind of focus on, is obviously Asian giant hornets still being surveyed for. I've been a part of that response project since we started. We're kind of always surveying for invasive moths, especially the spongy moth, which is formerly known as gypsy moth and now has a new name. One of the things that we're kind of on the lookout for, if you've ever heard of it, is spotted lanternfly. And we want to keep that, out of Washington. We don't want it coming up from the area, where it's populated now in Eastern United States. I do primarily just outreach for like the pest programs. So things regarding different plants and insects is kind of my niche in the Washington State Department of Agriculture. The rest of the Department of Agriculture is very busy with the avian influenza currently. You might get out 15 minutes early.
That's what I'm thinking, Cassie. It looks like there's no more questions coming in. So we'd like to thank you for taking time this evening to talk with us about the Japanese beetle. And we certainly hope you don't find more of them, but we will keep an eye out and do our best to play our role. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. If you see them, say something.
Good night.